Hi everyone and welcome to your horoscope for the week of October 26, 2020. This horoscope is brought to you by 1millionnights.com. We have a very special sky playing out all throughout next week where everything is about the unexpected, the unknown, mysteries, secrets, and even the paranormal, where the highlight of the week is without a shadow of a doubt this very strong Uranian full moon taking place in the sign of Taurus, which is also a blue moon, meaning that it's the third lunar event in a month, and that is really, really rare. And of course, if that wasn't enough, it also happens to take place exactly on the 31st of November, which is the celebration of Samhain or Halloween in modern terms, a day when the veil between the worlds is really, really thin, and whatever is beyond the spirit, and of course the denizens of the ether, so to speak, have access into our world on that special day. And since there's also a full moon happening, well, it's going to be massive. But I'll be speaking more about that later on in this horoscope. And of course, we are also going to have a specially dedicated recording for the full moon in Taurus later on in the week. So we begin the week with the sun freshly entered into the sign of Scorpio. So the light of the sun illuminates this part of the sky, which has to do with a number of different things. And one of those things is definitely mysteries, the occult, paranormal, our own unconscious energies. So it's not just external mysteries, but also the inner ones. And Scorpio season on its own is always a time for mysteries, for enigmas, for unusual events, and of course, very deep psychological purges every single year. But this year is going to be really, really special and intense because on one hand, Mercury is still retrograding out of the sign of Scorpio, and when the planet of the mind is in that part of the sky in retrograde motion, well, it really opens the gates to our unconscious mind, allowing us to gaze into whatever lurks in there. But of course, since it opposes Uranus, that also adds a lot of this energy, because, sometimes it doesn't really matter if we want to gaze in there or not, it just pulls everything to the surface. So this can be a time of really powerful and profound, long-lasting psychological purges, where a lot of us are going to break certain unhealthy patterns for the long-term future. So if we have the courage to collaborate with this energy, not oppose it, as uncomfortable and sometimes as painful as it can be, because, when we have to confront our own shadows, it's not a very easy thing to do for a lot of us. But if this time we finally muster the strength to just behold the truth, accept it, and work with it, well, it can heal us for the long-term future, because on one hand, Mercury and the sign of Scorpio is all about healing and regeneration. And this energy is being set up on the 25th of the month when the sun is conjunct this Mercury retrograde. Of course, this is not a rare aspect. The sun meets with Mercury a lot of times each and every single year, but because of the other aspects and the major celestial setup, it is actually like a very powerful and almost blinding light illuminating our minds, our unconscious, and ultimately our souls, because that is what Mercury conjunct the sun represents, the light of truth, but that truth is perceivable by our rational minds, so we can actually work with it. And at the same time, there is also a really positive and fated energy in the sky, where Venus holds a trine with Saturn and Pluto, So simultaneously, this can represent really powerful and relevant karmic completions. It can also represent harvest because Venus is the planet of love and well-being. So for a lot of us, solutions are going to appear in our lives, especially solutions which have to tackle our most severe and urgent needs and problems. And some of those solutions can appear to be triggered by the hand of fate. And of course, since this trine with Pluto is still active, it's not as powerful as it was last week, but it's still pretty relevant. So that can also represent really strong and profound transformation and closures. Of course, some of those closures are gonna appear as losses, but this is where those losses are imperative and they are ultimately going to lead to the greater good, greater happiness, and greater well-being. For example, like a divorce. Of course, at the same time, Mars retrograde in its home sign of Aries still holds a square with Jupiter, but this energy is not as strong as it was. So, basically this kind of means that we're still fighting for our rights. We're still working with this energy which is meant to change our faith, change our hopes, change our optimism into a very healthy and grounded one. It is the energy of disillusioning, but it's really, really healthy. And because the square is not so intense, it's not as violent, it's not as frustrating, it is not as depressive as it used to be. And at the same time, it empowers us greatly to resolve and finish everything that is left behind from the past, especially which is in our power to complete, to finish, for example, investing time, effort, work, energy into completions is really, really favored, especially that Mercury retrograde is also active at the same time. So everything left behind from the past is favored. And ultimately, it is going to return into our lives either symbolically or like a direct invitation to finish it, close it, reevaluate it, or simply draw a relevant conclusion and make up our minds. On the 27th and 28th of the month, we have two very strong energy changes. On the 27th, Mercury is going to be at 0 degrees in the sign of Scorpio, so that represents we are finally starting to get a grip on whatever is going on deep inside of us. We might start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, or where this greater karmic picture is leading all of us. And at the same time, Venus is going to be at 29 degrees, so an erratic degree of the sign of Virgo, which represents that when there are certain needs in our lives, when we truly have to, for example, acquire something, reach a certain stability, or for example, get a new job, sign a contract, or just try our very best to at least mentally ground ourselves in matter, in physical reality, in real life, this can come through as a sense of urgency because of that aneretic degree. And whenever there is an urgency deep within us, we tend to become that much more magnetic, so we can draw solutions in our lives that much quicker and with greater efficiency. Now, of course, the downside of this energy, because, an aneretic degree also represents the shadow side of that sign, and with the sign of Virgo, that can be fears, that can be losing hope, that can be a paranoid, hair-splitting attitude that we take towards life and all our unfulfilled needs. Or it can also be where solutions do appear in our lives, but we tend to analyze them with an extremely critical eye, highlighting everything that doesn't match our expectations. So we might be a little bit ungrateful at this time, but it's not really a problem because the very next day, both Mercury and Venus are going to change signs. So Venus enters into her daytime home of Libra, where she is known as the celestial Aphrodite. Now this is an energy of blessing. It blesses all our relationship. It blesses our desire for equality, for balance, for equilibrium, and ultimately justice. And of course, it can have a really beneficial effect on our mental spheres, where our minds can be infused with the energy of beauty. This is the energy of philosophy. This is the energy of romance. This is the energy of platonic love, where we can simply project beauty, acceptance, tolerance onto everything. May that be a person, may that be a thought, may that be a philosophy, may that simply be an object. This is where all of us are going to embody that very specific Venusian kind of idealism and romance in these not so very easy times, where all of us are facing a global crisis that can affect each and every one of us one way or another. Even when we are not really affected materially, we are still affected psychologically, either because of the distancing, the isolation, or social media, the TV, and every single communication channel being flooded by fear, panic, etc. So we do need this Venusian dreamy vibe. We do need this infusion of optimism, hope, fantasy. And whenever our minds and our way of thinking, our philosophies are filled with beauty, with hope, with a touch of romance, well, that can surely uplift our mood and change our way of thinking, at least temporarily, and that is a really powerful coping tool to get by these very heavy, uneasy, and transformative times. Now at the same time, Mercury retrogrades back into the sign of Libra, so by now we are going to have both Venus and Mercury in this part of the sky. And there is a little bit of contradiction in here, because Venus is going to be in 0 degrees in the sign of Libra. 0 degrees represents new beginnings. It represents where we have the energy to initiate. We have the energy to reconcile, for example, to find new alliances, to find new connections, to see the light at the end of the tunnel regarding the symbolism of Libra, so partnerships, one-on-one alliances, interhuman connections, etc. While Mercury retrograde is going to be in 29 degrees, so anaretic degree of this sign, which is the shadow aspect. So we might challenge old relationships, we might speak a couple of angry words, we might challenge all those people who do not treat us equally, who do not project onto us what we project onto them. And of course, later on in the week, as Mercury advances backwards into the sign of Libra, it is going to hold squares, so conversations of tension with Jupiter and Pluto, and that can truly represent angry words, that can truly represent conflict. But this is where every square leads to a resolution. Every challenge, every hardship, every tension ultimately leads somewhere, and the bigger picture is that we can finally find forgiveness. We can finally come to terms with how our relationships are, with how other people in our lives truly are, and we can make up our minds which of our relationships are worth keeping and which have to ultimately be surrendered, but not in a very dramatic or vengeful way, but simply accept and forgive. And forgiveness is the key word here, because afterwards Mercury is going to go direct and return into the sign of Scorpio, and that is the place of forgiveness. That is where vengeance is born, but that is also where vengeance has to finally stop and die. And whenever the desire for vengeance, or to, give back exactly or even more that we received, especially regarding the negative things, well, that is already a very powerful karmic completion, because by forgiveness, by accepting it and by releasing it, we immediately cut the karmic cords. So whatever we shared energetically, karmically, psychologically with that person ceases to exist, liberating us and of course the other person as well. So all of this is going to lead to a very powerful transformation where we can appreciate all those people who we found that we deeply love and they deeply love us regardless of the nature of this relationship during this Mercury retrograde season, and we can finally eliminate it and erase all of those people from our minds who we judged as being totally unworthy, incompatible, or those who simply couldn't hold their places in our hearts and ultimately our minds. And Venus in her home sign of Libra is a really powerful ally because she is the one which makes us be able to correctly weigh, symbolically speaking of course, our relationships. This is where, the two scales of the sign of Libra, one represents the mind, the rationality, the cold logic, and the other one represents the ways of the heart, love, and of course our highest philosophies, which are not necessarily rational, for example our principles and our worldview. When these two work together in perfect harmony, that is the moment when we can make truly wise and empowered choices, and those choices are not going to be regretted in the future and of course the long-term future. This is when the heart has an intelligence of its own and it's definitely going to steer us in the right direction. So we must have courage to make decisions, choices, and judge from our heart spaces. Now at the same time, when all of this is taking place in the sky, including that full moon which I'm going to be speaking about in a moment, there is a very strong fated connection starting to perfect itself. We are talking about Jupiter once more meeting Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. Now this conjunction took place around April, and without a shadow of a doubt, it transformed and it changed our world, even in a very physical, material sense. So that powerful karmic theme is returning, and what's even more important, Jupiter will ultimately reactivate 23 degrees of Capricorn, where the Saturn-Pluto conjunction took place on the 12th of January 2020. So, the karmic forces, this massive karmic storm that deconstructs, burns to the ground the customs, the traditions which used to govern our world, our society, even our inner structures, until this present moment finally starts completing itself. But it's not just doom and gloom, because at the same time, with this scorpionic energy at play, where the modern ruler of Scorpio is Pluto, this is where the phoenix finally arises from its ashes. So it's time for us to be reborn, not just us as individuals and internally, but also externally. So the very first signs of reconstruction, the very first projects, ideas, efforts, or legislative, because Jupiter rules law, legislation, justice. So legislative projects and ideas are going to show themselves. So there is going to be genuine hope in the world out there. But of course, it's not an easy energy, just as our world was profoundly shocked, so to speak, in March, April. That theme is returning once more, and now we get to this very strong and very rare full moon taking place in the sign of Taurus, because this is where everything is about shocks, surprises, unexpected twists of events, and really strong revelations, secrets coming out on the world stage that can change absolutely everything. Now, on one hand, the sun by now is in the sign of Scorpio, so it is illuminating that part of the sky which rules secrets. So all the skeletons in the closet, everything that we have done, but the same goes for the world state, for our leaders, for governments, for the rulers, etc. And then it illuminates, it projects its light on the moon, being in the sign of Taurus, and also being conjunct, dancing together with Uranus, the planet of truth. We can perceive Uranus as the objective truth, the cold hard sword of truth descending upon everything. And since it's in the sign of Taurus, which represents stability, customs, value systems, it shocks everything. So we can expect a massive economic and also political earthquake. And in very rare cases, that earthquake can be actually quite physical as well, because the moon is exalted, it is extra powerful in the sign of Taurus, and when it's conjunct with Uranus, Uranus is very uncomfortable in that part of the sky, so it can basically pull on the tectonic plates in physical reality, and that can represent earth events, changes in earth events. Very unusual weather phenomenon, tsunamis for example. It can represent volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. But that is just one side of the spectrum. That may or may not happen in a very catastrophic manner. But the economic aspect, the political and social aspect, because Taurus is our currency, all of our value systems, everything that we hold dear basically, now that is going to be shocked. And especially by the secrets and by the revelations coming out, whatever they may be. Now how and what exactly is going to happen is under a veil of mystery, because on one hand Scorpio is all about secrets, and Uranus is unexpected, unpredictable, unforeseeable, especially when it's activated in this manner. So regarding events on the world stage, we can say expect the unexpected, because all of us are going to be surprised and shocked one way or another. Now regarding the individual, this highly depends on where 8 degrees of Taurus falls in our own personal charts, because that is where this new moon is going to take place. So it can represent a massive turnaround of events, or equally really powerful epiphanies, moments of sudden realization. For example, opportunities which require us to get out of our comfort zones, relevant and powerful karmic completions, because full moons have this quality to them. They represent the apogee of the lunar cycle, so they complete something, they bring it to fruition, they make it whole and complete. But all of this can happen in a very unexpected, sudden, quick, instantaneous, and unforeseeable manner. It can equally represent, for example, unexpected financial gains, something which is owed to you either, contractually or karmically, can all of a sudden just pop up in your life without you expecting it. It can represent romantic surprises. It can represent fated connections where there is absolutely no warning sign that it's going to happen. It can represent something very relevant, suddenly and unexpectedly returning from the past. The sun in Scorpio has that quality to it. But it can also play out as just a moment of epiphany, an ingenious, original, never thought out before idea which just pops into your head, and it can be the key towards your financial future, for example. Now, of course, there is a totally different kind of nuance to this full moon, which has less to do with material things and more to do with our psychology, so to speak, because after all, the moon is the ruler of our emotional worlds and the representative of the soul. So Uranus is the planet of revolution, rebellion, uprising. So, we might see powerful protests, powerful gestures of defiance against, centralized power and all the rules and regulations. But it can also represent a cry out for justice and equality, especially from a financial, material perspective. So, this energy can truly mobilize people. And, with the Mars squaring Pluto and Saturn kind of protests were more or less expected, and centralized power, so to speak, could prepare for them. But the Uranian kind of protests and uprising and people taking to the street, these are spontaneous and unexpected. So, no one might be prepared for what's about to come. And since Uranus rules the internet, well, that can also represent mediatic warfare, or even a certain kind of legal warfare where people will imperatively, through their democratic rights, so to speak, demand to find out certain truths or certain information is going to be demanded to be brought to daylight. Now, last but not least, my favorite nuance of this energy has to do with the supernatural. It has to do with the spirit world and the paranormal, because with Uranus conjunct the moon in the sign of Taurus, the moon, I repeat, being exalted in this part of the sky, which represents that even our inner world, our souls, our emotions are going to be that much more active. It's going to be spiked up. That offers us a certain kind of receptivity, a certain kind of openness towards, the supernatural, spirituality, and the unseen world. And the sun from the sign of Scorpio illuminating this, where the sun is Scorpio from a supernatural perspective, let's call it that way, can represent the spirits of our ancestors. It can represent the spirits of the dead. It can represent the bridge between our world and that of beyond. And if we add to this that it also takes place exactly on Samhain, and it's also a blue moon, and it also takes place on top of Uranus, well, this is where those who are passionate about the occult, paranormal activities, mysteries, occult secrets, and all that kind of stuff are definitely going to be delighted, because there is a lot of activity that's gonna take place, because Uranus also rules the Schumann resonance, so it's going to open our highest cerebral activities to perceive the invisible. And at the same time, Neptune forms the sextile with Jupiter, Jupiter amplifying absolutely everything. Neptune can represent the source, it can represent the hidden, the unconscious. In other words, the spirit. So this amplifies this energy that much more. And if all of this wasn't enough, well then Pluto is the ruler of the sign of Scorpio. So it is the king of the occult, of the paranormal, of the most unusual manifestations of the spirit. This is like a cocktail of paranormal energies that are going to enter our world. And since that moon in Taurus makes us that much more receptive and makes all of this that much more perceivable for all of us, well, that represents a Halloween or Samhain, or in some cultures, the celebration of the Day of the Dead, like we never had before. So I would suggest to all of those who are passionate and have a love for all of these things to prepare yourselves. Prepare your EVP recorders, prepare your Ouija boards, prepare your tarot cards, because there is going to be a lot of activity. And I would also like to mention that Dark Moon Lilith is also in the sign of Taurus, and Taurus is our senses and our physical perceptions. So some of the manifestations might be a little bit intimidating and scary, so we must be sure not to exaggerate and not to actively invite, into our lives or in this physical plane more that we can chew, because that will definitely not be a good idea. Well, this concludes your horoscope. Thank you so much for listening. If you need a personal reading, just log on to 1millionnights.com and find your dedicated advisor. Wish everyone a blessed and magical and truly mysterious Halloween. Until next time, bye for now.